Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Willow, 2010 post-punk off their second album release just before they split due to an onstage brawl. Jeez. Brings together noisy Sonic Youth-esque guitars, evocative deadpan vocals, detailed lo-fi production, and dense melodic guitar lines. Alright, so we're looking at the band Women with the track Eyesore. Let's dive into this and see about this noisy lo-fi post-punk. I didn't think the production was too lo-fi to kick the song off, but this is certainly a bit of a hurdle for me to get into. Beautiful little bass line though. This guitar over here is clipping. It ends up working with the general production, but I still find it to be a bit of a harsh sound. It's interesting, despite the fuzz and general abrasive texture work, there's something very calming about the harmonic and melodic work. I'm finding it really difficult to follow along to this though. There's obvious transitions like that. But have I heard a verse and a chorus? I don't think so. echo is an interesting idea too. I think it works very well with the general texture and atmosphere. I found the drum work interesting too. Typically driving, but kind of lacking energy in the sonic profile of it. I think a lot of that comes from the muted bass kicks. They're just not really present in the mix at all. Even that snare hit is overshadowed by the tambourine. Dang, and a minute-long fade-out, too. Seems a little excessive, but it does fit the mood. And I'm gonna talk about this a lot because it's one of the strongest things I have in my analysis. Interesting track. And it's now officially over. Okay. So yeah, atmosphere I think is its strongest element. It's a mix of the vocal delivery, the production even on the vocals, the way that the guitars sound, the harmonies that we have in the guitar work. All of it paints a very specific picture to me. Well, what's funny is it's not really a specific picture. It's a haze, it's a fuzziness, it's a lack of detail. In fact, if you will, put some attention towards this album art. I don't know if that's rain or sleet, snow maybe, possibly. It obscures detail. I can see that there's buildings, a street, some people maybe, some sort of structure, maybe a mailbox of some sort. But especially as you get closer to the right side, and we don't have the building there, and it's just the washed out sunlight, presumably, and how that mixes with the white of the snow or rain. Everything gets washed out. I have no idea what is over there. That's sort of what the song feels like to me. It is very hazy. I can hear the details in it. I can hear the guitar melody. I can hear the chord progression. I can hear the drums and the vocal melodies. But it's all sort of hazy. The plethora of vocal lines that come through, the wide reverb on them that muddies everything about them, the lack of tonal consistency, and almost a bit of a slurred delivery. Da, 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 da. Just kind of allowing all the words to morph into each other rather than having strict endings and beginnings and having this harsh enunciation to the words that would give distinction to each of the syllables. The guitars also kind of go along that way. There is a mass reverb to the guitar work, but there's also a lot of fuzz and distortion, and especially on the left guitar, it's too loud. It clips. It brings that white noise crackle into play often. The drums, I can hear the bass kick, I can hear the snares, the cymbals tend to come through rather clearly, but there's just overall fuzz, a muddiness to it. The bass kick isn't a thump, 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 nothing direct. It's more like a duh, duh, duh. It's just a loose, vague bass sound, a lower end tone. Nothing in the drum production emphasizes anything that would have this direct and immediate point of attack. It sort of is this muddy element to it. Even the bass, which I mentioned enjoying at the beginning, I can hear the melody again, but the notes overlap. There's so much reverb to it. Everything kind of comes together in a way that feels muffled. The production of the song is clear, but each instrument is not. And I find that to be a really interesting combination. It threw me off really hard at the beginning, especially since I was going in expecting lo-fi post-punk. I had a specific idea of what that was going to sound like, and that's kind of not what I got. I got something that was simultaneously high fidelity and low fidelity. And it all creates this picture, to me, of, much like the album art, something exceptionally hazy, where I can make out rough ideas of things, estimations, but fine details are gone. It's a song that feels like I'm on the other side of a wall of a performance. I'm outside the venue. I can kind of hear it. Yeah, I can make out the song, but I'm certainly missing the finer details in it. And this is really interesting when mixed with the harmonic components. Well, and the rhythmic components too. I'll tackle both simultaneously since they both add to the compositional atmosphere of the song. It's very laid back. There are some driving rhythmic ideas in the drums, particularly how the bass kick tends to line up and anticipate the snare accentuated points. I like that that gives it its forward momentum. It never feels like the song is stagnating, but it also feels laid back. It's not in a hurry to get to where it's going, but it certainly has a destination. Again, sort of putting two opposites together, much like we have the low fidelity instruments and the high fidelity song production. We have this feeling of leaning back, of chilling out, of relaxing, but having drive as well. It's a little bit erring on the slower side of momentum, but there's still a direction and an end that the music wants to get to. It feels simultaneously slow and driving. And when we pair this with the musical elements, the harmony, to me, I get a song that feels lethargic and a mix of hopeful optimism and sorrow. There's a darkness to this track based on the chord progression. And I don't quite know what to do with all of this information. It feels like living life in a haze. Just kind of a drunken stupor, taking these wild, steps, swaying back and forth. You're still going somewhere. You're just not really getting there in the most efficient way. And it's kind of mixed with this want to stand still, but a necessity to move forward. And all done with like a lack of care for the details of things. This might be one of the best songs I've heard that to me feels like a drunken song. I think it just captures that vibe perfectly. Fuzzy details, but knowing what you want to do, just kind of stumbling in that direction. And I find that to be very evocative from an artistic perspective. The song does this idea really well. It somehow smashes together opposing ideas in production, opposing ideas in pacing, and even opposing ideas emotionally, and finds a way to bring it all together and present it in something that isn't just doing a great job at showcasing all of these competing extremes, but doing it in a way that is somewhat palatable. It doesn't end up feeling avant-garde or experimental in any way. Now, that's not to say that it's totally palatable. It is difficult for me to listen to, and while I can enjoy less palatable music, I do tend to err closer to the mainstream. But if it's not palatable to me, it probably isn't palatable to a mainstream audience at all. And so we have a song that actively tries to hide itself. It pushes all the interesting things under a layer of fuzz and distortion, but doesn't go the noise rock area, which is where I was thinking it was going on based on the description, bringing up Sonic Youth's noisy guitar work. And I don't really feel like we got any of that in here. Maybe a couple of places in isolation, but most of the guitar work, aside from the production, which of course is hazy and distorted and clipping in some areas, really pushing the sonic barrier. But what's written on paper isn't really noisy at all in a majority of places. Honestly, the vocals are the noisiest part. They tend to introduce a lot of dissonance tonally by not really singing in tune with anything else. It's a very loose, raw vocal delivery. That is, of course, covered up by layers of reverb, too, that just amplify all of that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I would want to talk about on this. It is, well, here's one more thing. Structure. What is the structure of this song? To me, it just feels like an A section and then an A section with slightly different guitar work and then an outro, maybe, but the outro was also very close to everything else. That is to say that the sonic palette and the emotional palette of this song are very similar from start to finish. That's not to say that there aren't individual sections. Maybe there are and I didn't pick up on them. Maybe there is a very clear distinction between verse and chorus if you know what to look for. But to me, it just feels like 6.5 minutes of pretty much the same thing consistently, which isn't a bad thing at all, especially given how I feel about the atmosphere they've crafted. It makes sense to keep it static like that. It fits in with that whole drunken stupor idea. They're not necessarily ones to have dynamic shifting. Could you imagine uh, somebody who's just way too many drinks and shifting between like perfect composure and then like, having no control of their body? I don't know. It's like that cracks me up. So yeah, it like to me it makes sense that the song is static in its nature because of the way I relate to it, because of how I see it, what it's doing. But because of that also, I have a difficult time with the structure of it. It just feels like one consistent looping idea. I picked up a couple of nuances, but nothing that would be large enough for me to say, oh, this is a distinctly new part. So I'm curious to get into the lyrics and see what they have split up into the poetic sections, because like I said, I didn't really hear verse chorus or anything like that. It was just but I also couldn't make out words either, so that's also not going to help. Usually I'm either going to find musical distinctions, like a guitar riff changing or a drum pattern changing, and say, okay, this is a section change, or I'll hear a repeated phrase in the lyrics and say, oh, maybe this is the chorus, or maybe a vocal delivery will change. Instead of cleans we have harshes or something like that. But with everything as static as this is, and the fact that I can't hear any of the words, yeah, that did not help in my understanding of the structure of it. So let's dive into some lyrics and see what's going on there. All right. The only thing I got out of this song is that it might possibly be a relationship song and maybe also a breakup song. I don't get it. I really don't. Let me just read the first verse, and you'll kind of get a gist for what the entire song is like lyrically. Spill and heat consume both of the lights. They were flashing white and it grew pale. Gradually they lost our information. Sickly and ungracious, you turned to dirt. I barely understand what any of these lines are saying in isolation, much less how they relate to anything else, which, at least on the surface, seems to have no relationship at all. This is the whole song. The chorus says, "But those cruel tricks could not avoid me loving you or not. I just could not tell against your will, give out your number now." There's a part of me that wonders if this isn't a puzzle. Maybe if I just rearranged these lines in a specific way, it would make sense. And that seems like a really interesting way to write lyrics. It kind of made me want to try that on my own stuff. To write out lyrics in the linear fashion as I typically do, and then rearrange the lines, asking the listener later to hear the oddity, see the patterns, and solve the puzzle. But I don't necessarily know that that's what women are doing here. And so I'm just kind of left looking at these stanzas and kind of cocking my head and having a confused look and just saying, okay. But the idea of having cruel tricks done to the narrator and them not stopping them from loving the other person, or maybe not, as the line says. And then the final verse, the outro, because the structure here is verse, chorus, outro. So I wasn't too far off in my guess, but if you asked me where those distinctions lie, I would not be able to point them out. Like I mentioned, I kind of heard the idea and then a small variation on the idea and then another variation, but that was also the repeated fade out outro. So it all kind of felt very similar to me. I just picked out these small changes. But anyways, the outro says, "Overboard ahead of me. You're not lying next to me, just below the swaying palms, hidden by a bank machine." Not too sure what that is about, but at least this is the most cohesive stanza. If the relationship were a ship, the two people would be thrown overboard in two different places, assuming that the ship sunk, aka the relationship reached a finale, an endpoint, and they separated and went their two different ways. So they're not next to each other. The other person is below some swaying palms, which means they washed up on shore somewhere. But hidden by a bank machine, I have no idea what that means. But at least the other three lines make sense together in a way that none of the other stanzas do for me. And so I've tried to extrapolate from there. Okay, this is the end of a relationship. How does the rest of this song line up with that? Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I really have no idea. If anyone has any insight to this, let me know. But this is way, way over my head. Way too deep for me. So those are my, well, yeah, those are my thoughts on women's eyesore. I don't even know how to tie that back to the music. At least I had more of a concrete feeling about the music, and this is just vague, which the music also is kind of vague, but in a way that feels more concrete, if that makes any sense. What are your thoughts on this, though? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe just give me your own opinion about. Put all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. We'll be back tomorrow with next week's theme. No, with this week's theme, where we continue to explore some of y'all's favorite songs that have come out this year so far. That'll be tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.